My daughter's wedding was supposed to be the happiest day of my life as a mother. Instead, her groom stood up in front of a room full of billionaires, handed me a janitor's apron, and called me worthless. He thought he was humiliating me, but he had no idea who he was talking to. Let's call the original poster Margaret Cole. And this is the story of how she ended his son-in-law career, his fortune, and his entire world in exactly 72 hours. The sun had not yet cleared the canopy of ancient oaks in West Charlotte when Margaret Cole began her day. At 64, her movements were a well-rehearsed dance of discipline. She didn't own a smart mirror that told her the weather. She opened her window and smelled the humidity rising from the Carolina red clay. She moved to the kitchen, a space that smelled of chicory, dried herbs, and 40 years of Sunday dinners. To an outsider, the kitchen was dated. Linoleum floors from the 90s, a laminate countertop with a faint stain from a spilled beet jar in 1994. But Margaret saw a battlefield where she had won every war against poverty. As the coffee dripped, she sat at her small oak table and opened a weathered leather ledger. This wasn't a diary of feelings. It was a map of an empire, Unit 4, 12th Street, roof repaired. Tenant's daughter started college. No rent increase this year. Cole Plaza lease renewal with Wells Fargo, pending push for 4.2%. Now pause right there. That weathered leather ledger, that's not nostalgia, that's a weapon. While most people scroll their bank app and wince, Margaret was mapping an empire one entry at a time. Tracking your assets isn't boring accounting. It's how you find out exactly how powerful you already are and where to strike next. Keep that in mind as we go. She ran her fingers over the entries. People in Charlotte saw a retired cleaning lady. They saw the woman who used to haul a heavy industrial vacuum through the hallways of the Duke Energy Center at 3 a.m. They didn't see the woman who, for 4 decades, had taken every spare cent, every tax refund, and every bonus for working double shifts on Christmas and funneled it into distressed real estate. She was the ghost of Charlotte. While the city's young elite were busy Instagramming their brunch, Margaret was quietly buying the land beneath their feet. The silence of the morning was punctured by the aggressive, high-pitched whine of a high-performance engine. A white Audi RS7, a car that cost more than Margaret's entire house, swerved into the gravel driveway, kicking up dust that settled on Margaret's prized African violets. Damian Kruger stepped out. He was 29, with a haircut that cost $200 and a soul that cost significantly less. He adjusted his silk tie, looking at the small, neat house with the kind of pity one might show a stray dog. He didn't knock. He pushed the door open, the bells hanging from the handle jingling a frantic warning. "Margaret, for the love of God, did you forget what day it is?" Damian didn't look at her. He looked at his gold Rolex. "The rehearsal brunch starts in 2 hours. The florist is calling me. The caterer is asking about the seating chart. And here you are, smelling like old coffee and dirt." Margaret didn't flinch. She poured a second cup of coffee. "Good morning to you too, Damian. I find that the world moves much better when you give it a moment to breathe before you start shouting at it." Damian paced the small living room. He picked up a ceramic figurine of a cardinal, a gift from Margaret's late husband, and turned it over as if looking for a price tag. Finding none, he set it back down with a clack. "We need to talk about the image issue again," Damian said, dropping into a recliner that he clearly thought was beneath his status. "Simone is a senior associate at one of the top firms in the state. I'm on the fast track to a partnership at Kruger and Associates. Our wedding isn't just a ceremony, Margaret. It's a merger. It's a branding event." Margaret sat across from him, her back straight, her hands folded. "A branding event? I thought it was a promise between 2 people who loved each other." Damian rolled his eyes. "Don't be sentimental. It's exhausting. Look, I've seen the guest list. Victor Ashford is coming. The Victor Ashford. Do you have any idea who he is?" "I've heard the name," Margaret said, her voice a mask of innocence. "He's the sun that this city orbits around." Damian leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. If he likes me, I'm made. If he thinks I'm just some kid who married a girl from, well, from here, then I'm stuck in middle management forever. Which brings me to you. He gestured vaguely at her silver hair, her simple housecoat, and the room around them. I've arranged for a private suite for you at the hotel. You'll have a personal assistant, really just a handler, to make sure you stay comfortable. But I need you to stay out of the main foyer during the VIP reception. My parents' friends, they're from the country club set. They wouldn't know how to talk to a retired service worker. A service worker? Margaret repeated. The words felt heavy in the air. Let's be honest, Margaret. You spent 30 years scrubbing toilets in the buildings I now do business in. It's a great American dream story for a Hallmark card, but in a ballroom full of billionaires, it's an embarrassment. I've told everyone you're a retired property consultant. If anyone asks, just nod and talk about the weather. Don't mention the janitorial union. Don't mention the bus rides. And for heaven's sake, don't mention that you still live in this neighborhood. Margaret's mind drifted back to 1988. She was 36, her knees aching from 6 hours of kneeling on cold marble. She was in the executive suite of the Wachovia building, emptying a trash can filled with discarded blueprints. 2 men in suits were arguing in the hallway, ignoring her as if she were a piece of the furniture. It's a dog of a property, one had said. 6 acres in the south end, nothing but abandoned warehouses and rust. I'll take any offer just to get the taxes off my books. Margaret had frozen. She knew that area. It was near the old rail line. She had seen the city's master plan in a discarded newspaper 2 days prior. They were planning a light rail. That rust was about to become gold. The next morning, she had walked into the bank with $5,000. Every cent she had saved by skipping meals and sewing her own clothes. The loan officer had laughed at her. A cleaning lady buying commercial land. Stick to your mop, Mrs. Cole. She didn't stick to her mop. She found a private seller, a man even more desperate than the one in the hallway. She bought the land for $4,500 and a promise to pay the back taxes. That land now housed a $200 million luxury condo complex. She owned the dirt. They just owned the air. Hold on a second. Let that sink in. Here's the secret nobody teaches you in school. The city tells you exactly where the money is going. Infrastructure plans, zoning documents, city council proposals, they're all public. They're all free. Margaret didn't have a hedge fund. She had a library card and the discipline to pay attention while everyone else looked right through her. Remember that? Preston's voice snapped her back to the present. Are you even listening? I'm trying to save your daughter's reputation here. Margaret looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the fear behind his arrogance. He was a small man trying to fit into a giant suit. I hear you, Damien. You want me to be a ghost at my own daughter's wedding. You want me to hide the hands that built the world Simone walks in. I want you to be classy, Damien corrected. He stood up, smoothing his jacket. Oh, and one more thing. I had a developer friend look at this lot. He's willing to give you $150,000 for the house and the land. It's a generous offer for this vibrant part of town. You can move into a nice managed care facility in the suburbs, somewhere where you won't have to worry about the lawn. He tossed a business card onto her oak table. It landed on her ledger. Sign the intent to sell before the honeymoon is over. Think of it as a wedding gift to us. It'll be one less thing for Simone to worry about, having to take care of her mother in this shack. Damien walked to the door, his hand on the handle. See you at the brunch? And Margaret, wear the pearls I suggested. The ones from the mall. They look authentic enough. The Audi roared away, leaving a plume of exhaust in the morning air. Margaret picked up the business card. She didn't tear it. She didn't throw it away. She simply set it aside and opened her ledger to the very last page. There was a phone number there, handwritten in gold ink. She picked up her rotary phone, a relic she refused to replace. Victor, it's Margaret Cole. On the other end of the line, Victor Ashford, the man Damien worshipped like a god, stood up from his desk in a penthouse office. "Margaret, it's been too long. I was just looking at the quarterly reports for the Heritage Trust. You're making us all look like amateurs. Victor, I need a favor," Margaret said, her voice turning to cold, sharpened steel. "That young analyst you hired last year, Damian Kruger? He's the one marrying my Simone." Victor's tone shifted instantly. "I know the name. Ambitious. A bit loud. Is there a problem?" "The problem is, he doesn't know whose floor he's standing on. Victor, he wants to buy my house for $150,000. He thinks I'm a liability to his brand." There was a long, dark silence on the other end. Then Victor spoke, his voice trembling with a mix of shock and anticipation. "What do you want me to do, Margaret?" "I want to teach him about image, Victor. I want to teach him about foundations. By the time the cake is cut on Sunday night, I want Damian Kruger to realize that the cleaning lady didn't just empty his trash. She owns the bin, the desk, the office, and the very air he breathes." "Consider it done," Victor said. "What's the timeline?" 72 hours, Margaret said, looking at the yellowed photo of her husband on the mantel. "I want his world to collapse with compound interest." The Ritz-Carlton ballroom in Charlotte was a cathedral of excess. Massive crystal chandeliers hung from the 2 0-foot ceilings like frozen tears, casting a fractured diamond-like glow over 30,000 square feet of polished white marble. The air was thick, a suffocating blend of expensive French perfume, aged scotch, and the distinct metallic scent of old money and new ambition. Damian Kruger stood at the epicenter of the foyer, a monument to his own vanity. He adjusted his gold cufflinks, his reflection caught in a towering, gilded mirror. To Damian, this wasn't a wedding. It was a coronation. He looked at Simone, radiant in her silk gown, but his mind was busy calculating the net worth of every guest entering the room. "Look at them, Simone," Damian whispered, his eyes scanning the crowd like a hungry wolf. "Victor Ashford hasn't arrived yet, but the executive VP of Bank of America is over by the bar. The entire board of Duke Energy is in the East Wing. Tonight, our names are etched into the financial history of this city." Simone forced a smile, her eyes darting toward the grand entrance. "Mom isn't here yet, Damian. Are you sure the car picked her up?" Damian took a long sip of vintage champagne, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "I gave the driver specific instructions. But honestly, babe, I hope she uses the service entrance. You know how she is. She'll feel overwhelmed by all this. I'd rather move her to the private VIP suite before the real crowd starts asking questions about her background." At that exact moment, the massive mahogany doors of the main ballroom swung open. Not the service entrance, not the side door. Margaret Cole walked in. The room didn't just go quiet. It seemed to lose its breath. She wasn't wearing the polyester purple dress Damian had mocked. She wore a bespoke midnight navy silk power suit tailored with such surgical precision that it commanded the air around her. Around her neck sat a single strand of black Tahitian pearls, orbs of dark light that whispered of wealth so deep it didn't need a logo. She walked with the terrifying calm of someone who owned the very ground beneath her feet. Every step on the marble was silent, yet every head in the room turned, as if pulled by a magnetic force. Damian froze. He marched toward her, his practiced smile crumbling. "Margaret, where did you get those clothes? And why did you come through the front?" "I told the usher to guide you to the back lounge." Margaret looked at her son-in-law, her eyes as still as a deep lake at midnight. "This hotel has 4 main entrances, Damian. I found this one the most convenient. As for the suit, it's been in my closet for a decade. I simply felt today was the right day to clean a few things up." Damian missed the metaphor. He was just relieved she didn't look poor. "Fine, just stay in the corner. Don't speak to anyone, unless I introduce you. My bosses are watching." The reception was a theater of microaggressions. Damian paraded his senior partners around, using Margaret as a prop to highlight his own charity. "Gentlemen," Damian said to 2 partners from a New York hedge fund, his voice dripping with false humility. "This is my mother-in-law, Margaret. a woman of honest toil. She spent 40 years cleaning the very skyscrapers we trade in. I always tell Simone, we keep her close to remind us how hard the lower rungs work so we can stay at the top. The men, bellies round from years of expensive steak, chuckled condescendingly. They looked at Margaret as if she were a specimen in a jar. "How charming," one said, swilling his scotch. "I hope the chandeliers aren't too bright for you, Mrs. Cole. Quite a change from the fluorescent bulbs of the janitor's closet, I imagine." Margaret smiled, a smile with the edge of a surgeon's scalpel. "The light here is excellent, sir. It makes it much easier to see the stains that people try to hide under expensive suits." Damien turned pale, quickly ushering the partners away. "Are you trying to ruin me, you old fool?" he hissed under his breath. 1,992. Margaret stood in the darkened boardroom of Nations Bank long after the titans of industry had gone home. She was buffing a coffee stain out of a $50,000 mahogany table. She noticed a file left behind. It was a list of properties being liquidated due to the recession. Among them was a cluster of derelict warehouses in the North End. The price was a fraction of their value. The experts in that room had laughed at the area, calling it dead soil. Margaret had stopped, looking out the 40th floor window. She didn't see dead soil. She saw the city's expansion 20 years into the future. She stayed awake for 3 days, calculating every penny. She sold her late husband's wedding ring, the last thing she had, to make the down payment on the first warehouse. The next morning, when she returned to mop the floors, the CEOs walked past her as if she were a ghost. They didn't know that the woman scrubbing the floor beneath their feet had just become the landlord of the land they would eventually beg to lease back 2 decades later. Now, think about this for a second. Everyone in that boardroom called it dead soil. Margaret called it a discount. This is exactly what Warren Buffett meant when he said, "Be greedy when others are fearful." Recessions don't destroy wealth, they just move it. The question is always the same. Are you the one running away from the deal, or the one quietly walking toward it? Back to the story. The time for the toasts arrived. The chamber music faded. Damien stepped onto the stage, microphone in one hand, champagne in the other. He felt like a king. "Distinguished guests," Damien began, his voice booming. "Tonight is about legacy, but I want to take a moment to honor our roots." He signaled for the spotlight to find Margaret. She stood perfectly still in the circle of white light. "My mother-in-law, Margaret Cole, is a symbol of humility. She cleaned the trash of this city for 30 years. And today, to thank her for clearing the path for Simone to reach my level, I have a special gift." Damien reached under the head table and pulled out a large box. He opened it in front of everyone. Inside was a neon yellow industrial apron with bold red letters. Damien's property assistant, honorary janitor, Margaret. Damien laughed into the mic, joined by the snickers of his drunken colleagues. "I know you'll miss the work now that you're retired, so I bought you this. After the honeymoon, I want you at our new estate every weekend. You can clean the guest wing, and I'll pay you double what you made at the cleaning agency. It's our way of keeping the help in the family." The room erupted in laughter. Simone stood up, her face white with shock. "Damien, stop it." And let's pause here for just a moment, because Damien just made the oldest mistake in the book. He confused silence for weakness. Throughout history, the most dangerous people in any room have been the ones nobody thought to watch. Margaret had been watching for decades. And while Damien was performing for the crowd, she had already won. Watch what happens next. Margaret didn't move. She didn't bow her head. She looked directly at Damien, and in that moment, the pressure in the room seemed to shift. Her silence wasn't humiliation. It was the silence of a storm gathering its strength. Margaret walked slowly toward the stage. Each step caused the laughter to die down. She took the microphone from Damien's hand. He was still grinning, convinced he had performed a perfect power play. "Damien," Margaret said, her voice warm but resonant, reaching every corner of the hall. "You are right about one thing. I have cleaned trash my whole life, and I learned a valuable lesson. Some stains on a floor can be removed with soap, but some stains on a soul, there isn't a chemical on earth that can wash those away." She held up the yellow apron for the room to see. "You gave me this to remind me of my place, but you forgot your own. You are standing in this hotel drinking this wine, dreaming of a future built on the assumption that I am the weak one here." She looked directly at Damien's bosses in the front row. "You gentlemen surely know the Cole Heritage Trust. You've been trying to book a meeting with the chairwoman of that fund for 6 months to beg for an investment in your South End expansion, haven't you?" Victor Ashford, who had just entered the back of the hall, leaned against the wall with a smirk. Margaret turned back to Damien, her smile now one of pure pity. "This apron is lovely, Damien, but I'm afraid I won't have time to wear it, because on Monday morning, I'll be busy signing the liquidation orders for Kruger and Associates, the firm my trust quietly acquired all the bad debt for earlier this afternoon." The ballroom turned into a tomb. The champagne glass in Damien's hand trembled, the liquid spilling over onto his polished leather shoes. "Damien," Margaret whispered, loud enough for the microphone to catch. "Your 72 hours start now. Enjoy the party. It's the last thing you'll ever borrow from my family." She dropped the microphone. The screech of the feedback echoed like a siren for his falling empire. Margaret walked off the stage, passing Damien as if he were nothing more than a smudge on the floor she hadn't yet had time to wipe away. Let me pause the story here for a second. Hold on. Let that land. The Cole Heritage Trust is what's called a family holding trust, a legal structure that owns assets across multiple companies and industries. Wealthy families use trusts to protect assets from lawsuits, minimize taxes, and transfer generational wealth across generations. Margaret didn't just build wealth. She built a structure that would keep building long after she was gone. That's the difference between making money and creating legacy. Now let's keep going. The microphone hit the floor with a thud that seemed to vibrate through the very foundation of the Ritz-Carlton. For 10 seconds, the only sound in the ballroom was the hum of the air conditioning and the distant clink of a silver spoon against a porcelain plate. Damien stood frozen on the stage, the neon yellow apron still draped over his arm like a mocking shroud. The champagne on his shoes felt like ice. He looked out at the sea of faces, men he had groveled to, women he had tried to impress, and saw nothing but a blurred mosaic of shock. Margaret didn't look back. She walked toward the grand exit, her silk suit shimmering like oil on water. As she reached the doors, Victor Ashford stepped forward. The man Damien considered a titan of industry didn't just greet her. He bowed his head slightly in a gesture of profound ancient respect. "The car is waiting, Chairwoman," Victor said, his voice carrying clearly to the front rows. "The board of the Heritage Trust is on standby for the midnight briefing." Margaret nodded, her face a mask of regal indifference. "Thank you, Victor, and ensure Mr. Kruger's tab for tonight is sent directly to his personal account. I believe he's no longer on the firm's expense list." The black Cadillac Escalade glided through the rain-slicked streets of Charlotte. Inside the cabin was a cocoon of leather and high-tech displays. Margaret sat in the back, her black pearls glowing in the dim light of a tablet screen. "Show me the Kruger and Associates exposure," she commanded. Victor tapped the screen. A complex web of shell companies, high-interest loans, and predatory debt appeared. Damien's firm was over-leveraged, Margaret. They bet big on the North End development, thinking they could flip the land. But they didn't realize who owned the zoning rights. "They thought they were the sharks," Margaret whispered, scrolling through the names of the investors. "But they were just swimming in my pool." To the average citizen, the Cole Heritage Trust was a mystery, a silent partner in the city's skyline. But to those who knew, it was the ghost of the South, the 4th Street corridor. Margaret didn't just own a house there. She owned the entire block through a holding company called Bluebird Legacy. The tech hub, 40% of the server farms powering the city's banking app sat on land Margaret bought for pennies in the 90s. The Ritz-Carlton. Even the very hall where Damien insulted her was managed by a firm in which Margaret held a 15% silent stake. She wasn't just wealthy, she was the infrastructure. 2005. The great housing bubble was inflating. Margaret sat in her small kitchen, her hands red and raw from a double shift. She was 60 years old then, her back aching, but her mind was sharp as a razor. Damien, then a cocky college student dating Simone, had come over for dinner. He had looked at her old ledger and laughed. "Margaret, why do you keep these paper records? Everything is digital now, and honestly, buying these old multifamily units in the hood is a waste. You should put your little savings into the stock market. I'm making 20% on subprime derivatives." Margaret had looked at him over her glasses. "Damien, paper doesn't crash when the power goes out, and people will always need a roof, no matter what the derivatives say." Okay, stepping out of the story for a moment. Damien was making 20% on subprime derivatives and laughing at her paper records. 3 years later, the entire subprime market collapsed and wiped out billions overnight. Margaret's old-fashioned properties, still standing, still rented, still compounding. There's a reason the oldest wealth in the world is still sitting in land and not in a trading algorithm. Never let someone with a flashy short-term gain laugh at your long game. Back to the story. That night, after he left, she bought 3 more foreclosed properties in a neighborhood the banks had abandoned. She knew the city was planning a new school nearby. She didn't buy for the 20% gain. She bought for the 100-year legacy. Back at the Ritz, the party had dissolved into a chaotic murmur. Damien had retreated to the bridal suite, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He tore off his tuxedo jacket, the expensive fabric ripping at the seam. He grabbed his phone and dialed his broker. Pick up, you son of a Kruger. Is that you?" The broker's voice was frantic. "What the hell happened at that wedding?" "I just got a margin call from our primary lender. They've pulled the credit line for your personal portfolio." "What? On whose authority?" Damien yelled, his voice cracking. "Cole Capital. They bought out the debt 10 minutes ago. They're demanding full liquidation by Monday morning." "Damien, if you don't cover the $1.2 million, they're coming for your assets. The Audi, the condo, everything." Damien sank to the floor, the phone slipping from his hand. The neon yellow apron lay in the corner of the room, looking like a bright, poisonous snake. Simone entered the suite. She had taken off her veil. She looked at her husband, the man she thought was a visionary, and saw a terrified child. "Is it true, Damien?" she asked, her voice hollow. "The embezzlement? The borrowed funds from the firm to pay for this wedding?" Damien looked up, his eyes bloodshot. "I did it for us, Simone. Your mother, she's a monster. She's been hiding this wealth while we struggled. She could have helped us." Simone shook her head, a tear finally falling. "We weren't struggling, Damien. We were living beyond our means because you wanted to look like a king. My mother didn't hide her wealth from me. She hid it from you. She told me a year ago that if you ever treated me with respect, she'd make us the heads of the trust. But she knew you only loved the image of us." "Damien, wait." "No," she said, her voice turning as cold as her mother's. "The car is downstairs, not the Audi, the one my mother sent. I'm going home to the shack on 4th Street. You should probably start packing. I hear the Ritz-Carlton charges a very high late checkout fee." Sunday morning broke over Charlotte with a deceptive peace. Damien sat in his Audi, parked on the side of a road overlooking the city. He had no home to go to. The locks on his condo had already been changed by the management company, another Cole subsidiary. He looked at his reflection in the rearview mirror. The star analyst was gone. In his place was a man who realized that the cleaning lady hadn't just taken out the trash, she had taken out him. And the 7:02 hour clock was only at the 2:04 hour mark. Sunday morning in Charlotte usually smells like rain and expensive brunch. For Damian Kruger, it smelled like ozone and desperation. He was sitting in his Audi RS7 parked in a deserted lot behind a closed Starbucks. His fingers were flying across his MacBook Pro trying to access his offshore trading account, the one he had slowly seeded with consulting fees that his firm didn't know about. Access denied. Account frozen pending audit. The red text on the screen felt like a physical blow. He tried his personal Gmail. Password changed 4 hours ago. He slammed the laptop shut. He realized that Margaret hadn't just fired a warning shot at the wedding. She had launched a full-scale cyber blockade. Every digital door he tried to open was locked from the inside. He looked at his reflection in the tinted window. His designer stubble now looked like the growth of a shipwrecked man. He had exactly $84 in his leather wallet and a gas tank that was 1/4 full. Damian drove to the only person he thought could save him. Leonard Hatch, a high-priced fixer lawyer who specialized in making white-collar crimes disappear. Leonard's office was in a sleek glass cube in the Uptown district. Damian burst into the lobby, ignoring the receptionist. He found Leonard in his corner office, staring out at the skyline. "Leonard, you have to file an injunction." Damian barked, pacing the floor. "Margaret Cole, she's interfering with my private contracts. She's frozen my accounts without a court order. It's tortious interference. I want to sue her for $50 million. Leonard didn't turn around. He held up a single sheet of paper. "I can't represent you, Damian." "What? Why? I've paid you 6 figures over the last 3 years. You paid me with checks drawn from a Kruger and Associates subsidiary," Leonard said, finally turning to face him. His expression was one of clinical pity. "That subsidiary was bought by the Cole Heritage Trust at 6 a.m. this morning. Technically, you paid me with her money." And more importantly, Leonard gestured to the window, pointing at a construction crane across the street. "See that building? She owns the land. My firm's lease is up for renewal next month. Do you think I'm going to commit professional suicide for a man who is about to be indicted for grand larceny?" Damian felt the floor tilt. "Indicted? On what grounds?" "Victor Ashford sent over a gift box this morning," Leonard said, sliding a folder across the desk. "It contains every expense report you've filed in the last 24 months. The client dinners that were actually date nights, the research trips to Vegas, and the big one, the $200,000 you moved from the escrow account to pay for that circus of a wedding. I was going to put it back," Damian yelled. "In the eyes of the DA, putting it back is just a confession with a return date," Leonard replied. "Get out of my office, Damian, and take your Audi. The repo man is already pinging its GPS. Let's stop here for a second." Leonard didn't abandon Damian because he was a bad lawyer. He abandoned him because his building lease was up for renewal and Margaret owned the land. This is what real power looks like. It doesn't shout, it doesn't threaten, it simply makes the cost of opposing it too high for anyone to bother. Damian never saw it, because he was too busy looking up to notice who owned the ground beneath him. Now, back to the story. 1998. A young Damian was an intern at a mid-sized brokerage. Margaret was the night lead for the cleaning crew. Damian had dropped a heavy crystal paperweight, shattering it on the floor. "Hey, you," he had called out, not even looking at her. "Clean this up, and make sure you get the small shards. I don't want to cut my Italian loafers tomorrow." Margaret had knelt down, picking up the glass with her bare hands. She didn't complain. She didn't look up. But as she cleaned, she looked at the papers on his desk. They were internal memos about a short squeeze the firm was planning on a local textile company. She didn't know what a short squeeze was yet, but she remembered the name of the company. That night, she went to the public library and looked it up. She realized the firm was trying to destroy a business that employed 300 people just to make a quick profit. She took her rainy day fund, the money she had saved for Simone's braces, and bought the long position. She didn't do it for the money. She did it because she hated the way Damian looked at her, like she was part of the trash he wanted removed. When the squeeze failed and the firm lost millions, Damien was fired. Margaret used the profits to buy her first commercial storefront. Now think about this. A short squeeze is Wall Street's version of a trap, and the firm walked right into it. But notice what Margaret did. She didn't understand the financial instrument at first. She went to the library, learned it overnight, and turned other people's greed into Simone's braces and her first commercial property. She didn't need a finance degree. She needed the hunger to figure it out. That's a lesson worth writing down. She learned then the person holding the broom sees the cracks in the foundation long before the person sitting at the desk. By Sunday evening, the sun was setting behind the coal tower. Damien was sitting on a park bench, his Audi gone, towed while he was inside a greasy diner trying to use his last few dollars for a burger. His phone buzzed. It was a restricted number. "Hello," he whispered. "How does the air taste down there, Damien?" It was Margaret. Her voice was calm, almost melodic. "You're a monster," Damien hissed. "You've taken everything. My career, my home, my wife. Are you happy?" "I haven't taken anything you didn't offer me on a silver platter, son," Margaret replied. "You gave me your career when you decided to steal from your clients. You gave me your home when you signed a lease with a morality clause you couldn't keep. And you gave me my daughter when you forgot that she is a Cole, not a Kruger. What do you want?" "I want you to look at that yellow apron," Margaret said. "I know you kept it. It's in your hand right now, isn't it?" Damien looked down. He was clutching the neon yellow fabric like a security blanket. He didn't even remember picking it up from the hotel floor. "Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., Margaret continued. "The boardroom, floor 60. Don't be late. I'd hate to have the police pick you up before we've had our performance review." The line went dead. Damien looked up at the coal tower. It was the tallest building in the city. At the very top, a single office light was on. He realized that for 2 years he had been sleeping in a bed bought by his mother-in-law, driving a car insured by her companies, and working in a building she owned. He had been a puppet in a theater she built, and he had been too arrogant to notice the strings. The 7 two-hour clock was ticking. 24 hours remained. Monday morning in Charlotte arrived with a relentless cold drizzle. The city's financial district was a hive of activity, a sea of black umbrellas and polished leather. Damien Kruger stood on the sidewalk across from the coal tower, looking like a ghost in a $1,000 suit. He had spent the night in a 2-4-hour diner, nursing a single cup of black coffee until the manager asked him to leave. His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw covered in a thick, dark stubble. He looked at the towering glass monolith that bore the name of the woman he had called a cleaning lady. He tried to walk through the revolving doors. "Excuse me, sir. Badge." The security guard was a mountain of a man with a military fade. He didn't recognize Damien without the Audi and the arrogance. "I'm Damien Kruger, senior analyst at Kruger and Associates. I have a meeting on the 60th floor." The guard checked his tablet. A slow, mocking smile spread across his face. "Mr. Kruger, yeah, I have the note here. You've been flagged as a security risk to the building. You're not allowed past the turnstiles without an escort." Damien felt the eyes of the young interns on him. They were the same kids he used to bark orders at. Now they were whispering, pointing at his wrinkled shirt and the way he smelled of stale coffee and defeat. A young woman in a sharp blazer stepped out of the elevator. It was Diana, Damien's former junior assistant. She was carrying a cardboard box. "Here," she said, thrusting the box into his arms. "The HR director told me to bring this down. Your personal effects. The firm is officially under restructuring, or, as the partners are calling it, the Great Cleaning." Damien looked into the box. A framed photo of himself at a gala, a gold-plated stapler, a half-empty bottle of expensive cologne. His entire life had been reduced to the contents of a recycled container. "Diana, wait." Damien grabbed her arm. Tell them I can fix the escrow accounts. I have leads. I have Damien. Stop." Diana said, her voice filled with a mixture of pity and disgust. "The FBI was in your office an hour ago. They're not looking for leads." They're looking for the paper trail of the $200,000 you laundered through the wedding caterer. You're not an analyst anymore. You're a case number. The box felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. As Diana walked away, the giant TV screen in the lobby, the one that usually showed stock tickers, flickered. Breaking news. Kruger and Associates acquired in hostile takeover by Cole Heritage Trust. Allegations of massive fraud uncovered. Damien watched his own professional obituary play out on a 40-foot screen. 2010, the height of the foreclosure crisis. While Damien was at a frat party bragging about his future career in high finance, Margaret was standing in a dusty hallway of the county courthouse. She was bidding on a block of distressed apartment complexes in a historically black neighborhood. The big banks didn't want them. They were toxic assets. A young hotshot broker, not unlike Damien, had approached her. "Ma'am, you're wasting your time. These buildings are trash. The tenants can't pay. You'll be bankrupt in 6 months." Margaret didn't look up from her paperwork. "They aren't trash, young man. They're homes. And the reason the tenants can't pay is because your bank raised the interest rates to 18% on a Friday and expected a miracle by Monday. She bought the block. She didn't evict the tenants. She lowered their rent by 10% and hired them to help her renovate the buildings. She turned toxic assets into a loyal community. By 2015, those buildings were worth 10 times what she paid. This is me now, not the story. Every other investor saw toxic assets. Margaret saw 300 families who needed a landlord that wasn't trying to destroy them. So she lowered the rent, hired the tenants, and turned enemies into allies. 10 years later, those buildings were worth 10 times what she paid. Loyalty, it turns out, has an extraordinary return on investment. Never underestimate the power of making people feel safe. She learned then wealth isn't just about what you own. It's about who owes you their loyalty. Back to the story again. "Mr. Kruger, the chairwoman is ready for you." The security guard led Damien to the private elevator. The ride to the 60th floor was silent, the air pressure changing in his ears as he rose toward the clouds. The doors opened to a room made of glass and obsidian. The entire city of Charlotte was laid out beneath them like a toy set. Margaret was sitting at the head of the table. Beside her sat Victor Ashford and a man in a dark suit with a federal badge pinned to his lapel. Damien didn't sit. He couldn't. He stood at the edge of the table, clutching his box of personal effects like a shield. "You look tired, Damien," Margaret said. She wasn't mocking him. Her voice was as clinical as a surgeon's. "Did you enjoy the walk?" "I find that the city looks very different when you're not seeing it from the tinted windows of a leased Audi." "What do you want, Margaret?" Damien's voice cracked. "You've destroyed me. Is that enough? Do you want me to beg?" "I don't care about your pride, Damien," Margaret replied, sliding a thick legal document across the table. "I care about the legacy. You stole $200,000 from a trust fund designed to help underprivileged students in this city. You thought no one would notice because the lower rungs don't have accountants." She gestured to the man with the badge. "This is Special Agent Carter. He has a warrant for your arrest, but I've had a conversation with the district attorney. I'm giving you a choice. Option 1, you go to prison, 10 to 15 years for grand larceny, wire fraud, and embezzlement. You'll be out by 45, but you'll never be allowed to work in finance, real estate, or even retail ever again. You'll be a felon, a trash person, as you like to say. Option 2, you sign this confession of judgment. You agree to a lifetime ban from the financial industry. You forfeit every asset you think you own, including the watch on your wrist, and you work for the Cole Heritage Trust." Damien's eyes widened. "Work for you? As what?" Margaret reached into a drawer and pulled out a small folded piece of fabric. She tossed it onto the obsidian table. It was the neon yellow industrial apron. "We have a new development in the South End, Damien. 600 units. They need a maintenance coordinator, but you won't be in an office. You'll be on the ground, scrubbing the floors, emptying the trash, fixing the toilets of the people you tried to exploit. You want me to be a janitor? Damien whispered, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. I want you to learn the value of $1 you actually earned, Margaret said. You'll work for minimum wage. Every cent above your basic living expenses will go toward paying back the $200,000 you stole. It will take you 30 years. You can't be serious, Damien gasped. I am as serious as the floor you're standing on, Damien. You spent your life trying to climb over people like me. Now you're going to spend the rest of it serving them. Or you can go to the county jail right now. Agent Carter is waiting. Damien looked at the apron. He looked at the handcuffs on the table. He looked at the city he had tried to conquer and realized it was built by hands like Margaret's, hands that were tired, calloused, and unyielding. He reached for the pen. The 7 two-hour clock hit 0. The air on the 60th floor was different. It was thin, filtered, and smelled of ozone and expensive furniture polish, the kind Margaret used to apply by hand decades ago. The boardroom was a panoramic cage of glass. Outside, the rain lashed against the windows, blurring the city of Charlotte into a gray, indistinct watercolor. Damien stood at the edge of the obsidian table. He felt small. The box of his personal effects sat on the floor by his feet, a pathetic collection of plastic and broken dreams. Across from him, Margaret sat like a queen on a throne she had carved out of the very bedrock of the city. Victor Ashford began to read the restitution agreement. Each word was a gavel strike, clause 12.4. Victor's voice was devoid of emotion. The subject, Damien Kruger, hereby admits to the unauthorized transfer of $214,500 from the Cole Heritage Escrow. He agrees to a lifetime debarment from FINRA and the SEC. He will surrender his passport, his professional licenses, and all titles to personal property currently held in his name. Damien's hand hovered over the gold fountain pen. A lifetime debarment. Victor, come on, I'm 29. You're telling me I can never even work as a bank teller? You're lucky you're not working in the prison laundry, Damien. Victor snapped, closing the folder. The chairwoman is being generous. Most people in this building wanted to see you in an orange jumpsuit by noon. Damien looked at Margaret. She wasn't smiling. There was no joy in her eyes, only the weary satisfaction of a janitor finishing a particularly dirty job. Sign it, Damien, she said, or don't. Agent Carter has the handcuffs ready. He's been remarkably patient, but he has a flight to D.C. at 2. I'd hate for him to miss it because of your indecision. Quick note here. A confession of judgment is essentially signing a court verdict against yourself before the trial even begins. Once that pen hits the paper, there is almost no coming back. Lawyers call it one of the most powerful documents in civil law. Margaret didn't need a trial. She needed a signature, and she got it. Damien looked at the neon yellow apron lying on the table. It was bright, garish, and a complete insult to everything he thought he was. He looked at the federal agent standing by the door. Then, with a hand that shook so violently the ink splattered on the page, he signed his name. Damien Kruger, the man who wanted to own the sky, had just signed a contract to serve the earth. 1,982. A much younger Margaret was scrubbing the grime off the windows of a small failing grocery store in the West End. The owner, a bitter man named Mr. Briggs, was yelling at her because she had missed a spot in the corner. "You're slow, Margaret," Briggs barked. "If you can't even clean a window, how do you expect to make anything of yourself? You're lucky I give you $3 an hour." Margaret didn't argue. She went back to the corner and polished until the glass disappeared. But as she worked, she noticed something Briggs didn't. She noticed the way the neighborhood was changing. She noticed the new bus route being painted on the street outside. She noticed that the store next door had just been bought by a developer. She took her $3 an hour, and instead of buying a new coat for the winter, she bought a 5% stake in the small parking lot behind the store. Briggs laughed at her. "A parking lot? People around here don't even have cars." 3 years later, the city built a light rail station on that lot. Margaret sold her stake for $50,000. She walked into Briggs's store and bought the building. She didn't fire him. She kept him on as a clerk, making him wear a name tag that said associate. Another pause right there. Margaret didn't buy the parking lot. She bought 5% of it. That's the move most people miss. You don't have to own the whole thing to win. A small stake in the right asset at the right time is worth more than full ownership of the wrong one. She turned $3 an hour into $50,000. The math wasn't magic. It was patience. Remember that. She learned then the person who yells the loudest is usually the one who sees the least. "The keys, Damien," Victor said, extending his hand. Damien reached into his pocket and pulled out the fob for the Audi RS7. He placed it on the table, then his key card for the Kruger and Associates executive gym, then the key to his luxury condo. "And the watch?" Margaret added quietly. Damien hesitated. The Rolex Submariner was the only thing he had left that made him feel like a Kruger. It was his armor. "The watch was bought with a bonus from a quarter where you faked the earnings reports, Damien," Margaret said. "It doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the shareholders you lied to." Slowly, painfully, Damien unbuckled the watch. He laid it on the obsidian table. The ticking of the watch was the only sound in the room, a countdown to a life that was now over. "Agent Carter, thank you for your time," Margaret said, standing up. The federal agent nodded, picked up the signed confession, and exited the room. Margaret walked around the table. She picked up the yellow apron and handed it to Damien. "The South End complex is called the Heritage," she said. "The head of maintenance is a man named Raymond. He's been with me for 30 years. He knows exactly who you are, and he has a list of every clogged drain and grease trap in the building waiting for you." Damien clutched the apron. "When do I start?" "Now," Margaret said. "There's a bus pass in your box of effects. Route 16 stops right in front of the complex. I suggest you move quickly. Raymond doesn't like it when his crew is late." Damien walked toward the elevator. He didn't look at the staff. He didn't look at the city. He kept his eyes on the floor he would soon be responsible for cleaning. As the elevator doors began to close, he saw Margaret and Simone standing together by the window. Simone wasn't looking at him with hate. She was looking at him with a profound, quiet relief. She had been set free. He had been set to work. The elevator descended. 60, 40, 20, lobby. Damien stepped out into the rain. He didn't have an umbrella. He didn't have a car. He had a cardboard box and a yellow apron. He walked toward the bus stop, the cold water soaking through his Italian suit. He sat on the bench next to an old woman carrying a bag of groceries. She looked at his suit, then at his box, and then at his tear-streaked face. "Tough day, sugar?" she asked, her voice kind. Damien looked at her. He thought about the 72 hours that had just passed. He thought about the cleaning lady who had dismantled his life with the precision of a master architect. "No," Damien whispered, his voice cracking. "Just a long overdue one." 6 months later, the south end of Charlotte had transformed. What were once rusting warehouses and cracked asphalt was now the Coal Heritage District. It wasn't a sterile corporate park. It was a living, breathing community. Low-income housing sat side by side with high-tech incubators. Roof gardens overflowed with kale and tomatoes tended by local teenagers earning their first paychecks. In the center of it all stood a bronze plaque, simple and unpolished, dedicated to the hands that build, the backs that carry, and the hearts that never forget where they started. Look at what Margaret actually built: affordable housing next to tech incubators, teenagers earning their first paychecks on rooftop gardens. This isn't charity. This is the highest form of investment strategy. When the people in your community prosper, the land you own prospers with them. She wasn't just a landlord, she was the architect of an entire ecosystem. This is what generational wealth actually looks like. At 5:30 a.m., a man walked across the courtyard of the Heritage Apartments. He wore heavy work boots, dark navy trousers, and a thick canvas jacket. His hair was cut short, his face clean-shaven. but his eyes held a weary, grounded focus that hadn't been there 6 months ago. Damian Kruger stopped at a trash bin that had been tipped over by a stray dog. He didn't curse. He didn't look around to see if anyone was watching. He simply reached into his pocket, pulled out a pair of heavy-duty work gloves, and began to pick up the debris. "Damian, the HVAC in 4B is acting up again," a voice called out. It was Raymond, the head of maintenance, the man Margaret had trusted for 30 years. "On it, Raymond," Damian shouted back. He grabbed his toolkit. He knew every pipe, every wire, and every secret of this building. He didn't own the floor anymore, but for the first time in his life, he knew exactly how to fix it. He walked past a window and saw his reflection. He wasn't wearing a $3,000 suit. He was wearing a name tag that said maintenance staff. He didn't look away. He finally liked the man in the glass. High above in the coal tower, Simone stood at the head of the obsidian table. She was no longer just a lawyer. She was the CEO of the Coal Foundation. Beside her sat Victor Ashford, acting as her senior advisor. "The scholarship fund has reached $50 million, Simone announced, her voice filled with a quiet power. "We've just approved the grants for 200 students from the West End. Most of them are the children of the service staff in this very building," Victor smiled. "Your mother would be proud, Simone. She always said the best investment wasn't in the bricks, but in the people who scrubbed them." "Where is she today?" Victor asked. Simone looked out the window toward the old neighborhood on 4th Street. She said she had unfinished business at the community center. "You know, Mom, she can't stand a dusty windowsill." The camera finds Margaret in the library of the new community center. She wasn't giving a speech. She wasn't sitting behind a desk. She was sitting in a small plastic chair reading a book to a group of 7-year-olds. She looked up as a young woman approached her. The woman was wearing a janitor's uniform, her eyes tired but hopeful. "Mrs. Cole," the woman whispered, I heard you used to do what I do. My manager told me you own this whole block. Is that true?" Margaret closed the book and stood up, her movement still graceful, her silver hair shimmering in the afternoon light. She took the woman's hand, a hand that felt just like hers used to feel. Calloused, brave. "I don't own anything, sugar," Margaret said softly. "I'm just the caretaker for a little while. And yes, I've scrubbed every floor in this zip code. Do you know what that taught me?" The young woman shook her head. "It taught me that people will look right through you," Margaret said. "They'll talk over you like you're a ghost, but while they're talking, you're learning. You're seeing where they're weak. You're seeing where they're dishonest. And if you're patient, if you're very, very patient, you'll realize that you aren't the ones serving them. They are the ones building an empire for you." Margaret reached into her pocket and pulled out a small gold key. She placed it in the woman's hand. "This is for the supply closet in the East Wing. Inside you'll find a scholarship application for the night school. I want you to fill it out, because one day I'm going to need someone to sit in that boardroom who knows exactly how to clean a window. This is the moment the whole story has been building toward." Margaret didn't hand her money. She handed her a key and an application, the two things that actually change a life. Real mentorship isn't giving people fish or even teaching them to fish. It's handing them the deed to the river and saying, "I'll see you in the boardroom." That is legacy. The sun began to set over Charlotte, turning the glass towers into pillars of gold. The camera pulls back, showing the entire city. It shows the luxury hotels, the bank towers, and the modest houses of the West End. We see Damian finishing his shift, exhausted, but at peace. We see Simone leading a meeting that will change thousands of lives. And we see Margaret walking home to the small house on 4th Street, the house Damian called a shack. She walked up the gravel driveway. She stopped to water her African violets. Then she sat on her porch swing, the same one she had sat on for 40 years. She opened her old leather ledger. She didn't write a dollar amount. She simply wrote one final sentence at the bottom of the last page. "The house is clean." She closed the book. The screen fades to black as the sound of the porch swing's gentle creak fills the silence. A rhythm of a life well lived, a debt well paid, and a legacy that was finally truly spotless. And I want to leave you with this. 4 words. The house is clean. Not the portfolio is full. Not the trust is funded. The house is clean. Because for Margaret, wealth was never the destination. It was the tool she used to make sure the people around her could stand up straight. That is the difference between being rich and being powerful. One fills a room, the other builds one. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, the person holding the broom sees everything.